The RBNZ surprise move led the equity benchmark to close in the red, but it has gained some 3% so far year to date. In the forex markets, the Kiwi dollar jumped by as much as 1.1% after the surprise decision, but currently the New Zealand dollar is slightly lower against the greenback. One New Zealand dollar giving you 63 US cents. And that's your business update for now. Back to you, Dawn.
Thanks very much, Roland. It is time for a break here on Asia Tonight, but still to come, French President Emmanuel Macron disputes that there's an inescapable spiral of tension between Beijing and the West, trying to balance diplomacy and economic interests on a visit to China and pushing leaders there to play peacemaker in Ukraine. We'll discuss this and more with Philippe Lacour, Senior Fellow at the Center for China Analytics. And NATO concludes talks with Indo-Pacific foreign ministers today as the US-led military alliance shifts its focus to the region in a bid to balance strong ties between China and Russia.
Farm life is unpredictable.
The house burnt down on the 19th of December.
But just by listening to nature,
what a beauty, my first ever beehive.
We can reimagine the way we grow our food.
You know, you can imagine this place 10 years from now. It's just going to be amazing, lots of fruits, lots of food.
I'm going back to my roots.
You are your own scientist. Over time, you need to observe and see what works for you.
And rethinking the role of an urban farmer in Growing Wild, Friday on CNA.
Aspirations and attitudes of Singaporeans are changing the nation that raised them.
Passionate Singaporeans living out their very ambitious dreams.
I'm looking to write a story of greatness, of extraordinary people impacting communities.
I guess a part of me wanted to connect even deeper with the people.
There's no point playing it safe. Safe will always be forgotten.
If we as Singaporeans are able to have a satellite that we can truly say was conceived, designed, engineered and built in Singapore, wow, how wonderful would it be?
This is Singapore, we don't give up.
Next time on Japan Hour.
ここでのミッションは3つの将棋のシルエットを見つけて写真に収めろ。
はい、行きましょう。大体1キロほどございます。
1キロ。
あれじゃない。あれやん。これ。ここ
でのミッションは2つ目を使った商品の中から人気3位を。おいしい。おいしい。
Japan Hour, Saturday on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation, and Zip Air. Summer fares now available with daily flights. What are the financial forces driving Asia's rise? From cross-border business expansion and technology for digital connectivity to capturing growth opportunities in the region and beyond. Understand the trends, innovations and corporate deals that are building Asia. Catch a new episode every fortnight on CNA and CNA.Asia.
Welcome back. Updating tonight's top stories. A defiant Donald Trump pleads not guilty to nearly 3 dozen felony charges. The former US president tries to turn the tables on the Democrats, accusing them of abusing the justice system to stop him from running again on the Republican ticket. Tension soaring once again in the Taiwan Strait. China launches military exercises as President Tsai Ing-wen prepares for an unprecedented meeting with US House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in Los Angeles. And Emmanuel Macron argues Europe must not separate from China economically as he begins a visit to Beijing. The French president also says Chinese leaders could play a peacemaking role in Ukraine, but warns them about arming Russia.
And for more on this story, Philippe Lecourt joins us live from Paris. He's a senior fellow at the Center for China and Analysis at the Asia Society Policy Institute. Mr. Lecourt, Mr. Macron, and I quote you here, indulging in his favorite but risky role as mediator, as China very eager to re-engage diplomatically between these two. Let's leave aside Ms. von der Leyen for the moment. Is there not space between Mr. Macron and Mr. Xi for some kind of positive, concrete agreement?
Well, I think, obviously this is the first trip that he's making as president since 2019. A lot of things have changed. Among them, the sort of poor diplomatic relations between the West and China, and of course the war in Ukraine. I think what's important for the Chinese leaders to understand is that on a daily basis, Europeans are watching this war unfolding in Ukraine. So it's not business as usual. And I think from the French president point of view, he has to come back with some kind of, I wouldn't say promise, but at least commitment, one step further from the sort of neutrality that China has been talking about, which is not considered as neutrality in most circles.
So Ms. von der Leyen's speech last week, when she made it very clear that China and Russia, their relations would be a determining factor in how the EU relates to China in the future, that is not understating the point at all.
Yes, well, you're referring to her policy speech on China just a few days ago, ahead of her trip, and she'll be joining President Macron in fact, tomorrow in Beijing, and they're having their own program afterwards. But the fact they're coming together is very important. First of all, because it's an EU position on China. China is now seen as a very assertive power, but also, as a great power. And I think the EU is keen to accept that fact. At the same time, there are a number of issues between China and Europe. One of them is Ukraine. Another one is perhaps the market discrepancies between the EU and China. As you know, there are many trade issues and investment issues. And in fact, Mrs. von der Leyen has been calling for more defensive tools from an EU point of view against this assertiveness. And she mentioned, state subsidies. She mentioned coercion, anti-coercion instruments. So that's why I was saying, things have changed between China and the EU. And what I'm struck by is all the comments this week in European media stating the obvious, that China has become a systemic rival to Europe, and and the partnership, if there is one, has to be assessed, on a case-by-case basis.
China perhaps realizing that, of course, ahead of this, the Chinese ambassador to the EU, so that's Mr. Fu Cong, suggested publicly and privately that one way forward would be if China was prepared to unilaterally lift sanctions on European parliamentarians, and then the EU could then go ahead and ratify this big stalled investment treaty, the CNA, and then perhaps there would be some positive outcome from this visit of Ms. von der Leyen and Ms. von der Leyen and Mr. Macron. Is that likely?
Yes, I don't think things will be sorted during this week, I'm afraid. One reason is because among the personalities that have been sanctioned by China are a number of members of the European parliaments, and they are not represented during this visit. And they are the ones who are asked to ratify the comprehensive agreement on investment. So, it's possible that they will discuss this issue, hard to get back to the negotiating table. But what I'm worried about is, some of the reasons why the deal is now frozen have not really changed. For example, China's commitments to, ratify the Convention on Forced Labor, the repression against the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang. All these kind of things are still happening, and I don't think the European Parliament will really be in a position to ratify the existing documents. So I think, both Germany and France, the two heavyweights of the EU, are probably willing to go ahead with a more sort of straightforward relationship with China. But it's difficult because there are so many discrepancies and differences between the two sides. Let's hope, they at least engage this time, which is not a foregone conclusion after 3.5 years of virtual relations, save alone a couple of meetings at multilateral venues. And this will be followed by more visits and more exchanges, which are utterly necessary.
All right, thanks for that. Philippe Lecour speaking live to us there from Paris.
Thailand's opposition Pheu Thai Party has unveiled its 3 Prime Minister candidates for the upcoming election. They are Paetongtarn Shinawatra, the 36-year-old daughter of exiled former Premier Thaksin Shinawatra, Seta Thavisin, that's the party's chief economic advisor, and Chaikasem Nitsiri, the party's chief strategist. CNA's Saksith Sayasombat joins us live now from Bangkok for more. Saksith, tell us more about Pheu Thai Party's 3 candidates.
It was a very open secret already that these 3 people will be nominated by the opposition Pheu Thai Party as the Prime Minister candidates in the upcoming elections. It was just a matter of which order. So now we know. First, we have Paetongtarn, the daughter of former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. Seta Thavisin comes in second. He is a former property magnate and currently the chief economic advisor. And Chaikasem Nitsiri in third. He is, he is the party's chief strategist and he also a former attorney general. He was actually the 3rd Prime Minister candidate in the last election for the Pheu Thai Party as well. Now, it is interesting that the party has picked the 36-year-old daughter of former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra as their first Prime Minister candidate. So they are betting on the brand name of the former Prime Minister Thaksin, that the Shinawatra family name is still standing very strong. And there is still a very loyal following with that as well. So that is definitely an interesting pick that the party has put forward there. And it's definitely the face, it has already been the face of the party in the past few months, since actually the late last year. But there's one thing, there's one minor detail. Paetongtarn is now almost 8 months pregnant, so she will have to bow out in the upcoming weeks during the election campaign sooner or later. Whether or not the momentum that she has created over the past few months will carry on until election day, well, we have to see.
Well, Saksith, the Pheu Thai Party is a very popular choice for many Thais. They may well do well at the ballot box eventually. How likely are they, though, to successfully form a government?
That is the big question. I mean, we know about the electoral power of the Pheu Thai Party. They have proven that again and again for the past 2 decades. But whether or not they can actually form a government, whether or not they can form a coalition, that is very difficult in the current circumstances. Let's not forget that we have 2 chambers in Parliament right now. The lower house with its 500 MPs that are all elected, but then the upper house, the Senate, the 250 senators there have been picked by the previous military government. And they have, some of them have already hinted that they are not going to vote for any candidate, for any Prime Minister candidate that has been put forward by the Pheu Thai Party. So that is why, the Pheu Thai Party has just said on stage right now that their goal, they have repeated their goal of 310 seats in Parliament, an absolute majority. So they don't need any other parties to go in bed with. They don't need any other coalitions so they can get over the line. But they also reiterated that there will not be any deal or any coalition with parties that are related to the previous military government, namely current Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha's new United Thai Nation Party and his previous party, the Palang Pracharat. So there will be no deal there. So this is going to be the strategy that the Pheu Thai Party is going forward in the next 6 weeks during the election campaign.
Saksith, thank you very much for that. Saksith Sayasombat, they're reporting live for us from Bangkok. Indonesia says progress has been made to resolve the crisis in Myanmar. Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi has given an update on Jakarta's ASEAN chairmanship over the past 3 months. Now, she says Indonesia is trying to build bridges, but notes that more steps forward are needed if Myanmar is to achieve sustainable peace. Chani Vapani with this report.
Indonesia says it has been working very hard where Myanmar and the 5-point consensus is concerned. Foreign Affairs Minister Retno Marsudi told media earlier today that Indonesia has facilitated the reopening of communication and consultation with what the minister simply called various stakeholders so that the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance on Disaster Management, also known as the AHA Center, can distribute humanitarian assistance to those who require it, regardless of their ethnic background, religion or political orientation. Now, Minister Retno highlighted this significant development, saying it was something that was previously unable to be done.
Perlu kami sampaikan bahwa dengan fasilitasi Indonesia tersebut, AHA Center telah berhasil melakukan konsultasi dengan beberapa stakeholders yang sebelumnya belum dapat dilakukan.
Details on who these stakeholders are were not shared. Other efforts outlined by the minister included strengthening the solidity of ASEAN's position in dealing with Myanmar, conducting engagements with various stakeholders with the goal of encouraging an inclusive and national dialogue, and holding meetings with a number of special envoys. Indonesia has also conveyed developments regarding Myanmar and the 5-point consensus before the UN Security Council last month, as the country continues its calls to stop acts of violence and the use of force. As we know, Indonesia is chairman of ASEAN this year, and Minister Retno in her briefing said there were 3 big pillars as derivatives of Indonesia's chairmanship theme, which is ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. Now, the first pillar is related to ASEAN Matters, the second related to the Epicentrum of Growth, and the third related to the implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, or AOIP. Now, under the umbrella of these 3 pillars, some areas of focus we can expect to see include issues such as the acceleration of negotiations on the text of the Code of Conduct, preparation of a roadmap for Timor-Leste's full membership in ASEAN, and signing of the SEAN WFZ protocol by the nuclear weapon states, as well as a vision for ASEAN 2045. Now, all of these fall under the first pillar, among other issues. Now, the second pillar will look at strengthening health architecture, regional food and energy security, regional financial stability, and digitization of economy and tourism. Finally, Indonesia will also host a flagship event, the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, later this year.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg once again reaffirming commitments to Ukraine, or lashing out at the growing partnership between Russia and China. He was speaking at a press conference after the 2-day foreign ministers' meeting in Brussels.
If President Putin wins in Ukraine, it will send a dangerous message to authoritarian leaders around the world that they can achieve their goals through brute force. So our support to Ukraine remains critical, and it is in our shared security interest. We also discussed China's growing alignment with Russia. China refuses to condemn Russia's aggression, it echoes Russian propaganda, and it props up Russia's economy.
And Trent Murray joins us live from Berlin. Trent, of course, foreign ministers from Japan, New Zealand, Australia also at this 2-day meeting of NATO. What is the significance of their taking part?
Well, I think it's very significant because, of course, NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance. It traditionally has been a military alliance based on countries in Europe working with the United States. But what we are increasingly hearing from the current NATO leadership, and Jens Stoltenberg in particular, is that there are other countries, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, that share what he calls the NATO values. They are individual liberty, democracy, human rights and rule of law. And those 4 countries that you mentioned, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and South Korea, are of course 4 prime candidates for those areas. And that is why we've seen those high-level meetings today. Jens Stoltenberg, speaking with those government representatives, spoke about the growing alignment, as he described it, between Beijing and Moscow. He also said what happens in that region matters to many NATO countries. And so I think we are seeing, of course, not just these words being exchanged in many ways, but also actual military cooperation. Of course, Australia, for example, has helped significantly in Ukraine, as well as the Japanese government with humanitarian aid and also support on the electricity network. So, look, obviously more work to do, but it is extremely significant, I think, that we are seeing such high-level delegations now visiting from APEC to these meetings in Brussels. And based on, I suppose, the chemistry, if you will, the way those two sides were getting along in many ways, I think we are probably likely to see more of these meetings moving forward in the future.
Thanks for that. Trent Murray reporting live to us there from Berlin.
And still to come, the biggest product liability settlement in bankruptcy history is on the cards. Johnson & Johnson is offering nearly $9 billion to settlements of tens of thousands of people over claims its talcum powder causes cancer.
And still to come on Asia Tonight, former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern delivers her final address to Parliament.
Take a 143 going to Jurong East, and on the way I can rest. Not enough sleep at night. There's no place to go.
Counting the cost of the global tech slowdown.
During hard times, a lot of those perks disappear, and eventually you disappear too.
The implications on human talent.
I was laid off, and it was like really, really heartbreaking in the moment.
Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Tonight on CNA.
The U.S. military is expanding its presence in the Philippines.
That's just part of our efforts to modernize our alliance.
Will this counter China?
Chinese incursions has increased and intensified.
Sa mga China na kinukuha nila yung Scarborough, dapat mabawi ng mga kano.
Or place the Philippines in the line of fire?
Anong pakialam natin sa pag-attack nila sa Taiwan? That is their race.
U.S. military expansion in the Philippines. Insight, Thursday on CNA.
In business, it's not just what you know. It's who you're working with. You see the right partner can help you make the right connections, which open up new frontiers of trade. There you go. Connections create avenues for expansion. Right? They also increase distribution channels and create opportunities for progress.
How high exactly is this wind turbine?
So when it comes to building your connections, where should you look? Turn to a bank that has connected business across ASEAN and beyond.
This April, stay on top of your game and live life with purpose. Keep your wellness in check.
So much gluten in everything. How does dementia develop in Asians?
As we examine the path to live a healthier life on the pulse. Groundbreaking stories.
Ethnic armed conflict on Myanmar.
Fascinating insights and first-hand experiences. Get to know Asia from those who live and breathe the region.
More peace and quiet at Chenjuro Lake.
CNA correspondent.
Ooh, wow.
Embrace a greener life and discover earth-friendly ways of growing your own food.
Good.
The new season of Growing Wild. This April on CNA.
Time for some more business news. Now, sobering outlook for the world's largest contract electronics maker. Taiwan's Foxconn cautions that second quarter sales would fall, and that's after reporting a slight uptick in its first quarter revenue. Sales rose almost 4% on year to nearly $48 billion. That's a record high. March revenue, however, slumped 21% from a year ago to $13.1 billion. That's steepened from a drop of around 12% in February. The key iPhone assembler said that the lower March revenue stems from declines in 3 out of 4 product lines. In particular, smart consumer electronics fell due to a high comparison base from March last year when new products were launched. Only its cloud division grew last month. Now, Foxconn will report its first quarterly financial results in May. South Korea is set to ease lending rules on foreign bank branches in the country. Its financial regulator announced the changes, which would free up more than $9 billion for lending. The Financial Services Commission said it would exempt smaller players from the requirement to keep the loan-to-deposit ratio at or below 100%. Now, foreign bank branches would also be able to classify short-term borrowing from their head offices as deposits. The regulator says the loosened rules would allow lenders to provide more fresh loans. It added that the changes are being made to reflect current economic situation since the rules were first introduced back in 2010. They'll apply to transactions in the local currency and would be implemented as early as this quarter as the necessary procedures are completed. Inflation in Philippines and Thailand is moderating further, supporting the case for central banks to consider a pause in their monetary tightening cycle. In the Philippines, its consumer price index eased for a second consecutive month to 7.6% in March, below an 8% forecast. Now, this also marks the slowest pace of price increases in 6 months on lower food and transport costs. Now, Thailand's headline inflation gauge rose more than the forecast of 2.8% in March from a year ago. And that's at slowest pace in 15 months, also on the back of lower energy and food prices. Now, that's for the first time that Thailand's headline inflation returned to the central bank's target range of between 1% and 3% in more than a year. Meantime, today's inflation data will offer some respite for the Philippines. Now, Southeast Asia's fourth biggest economy has been grappling with intense inflationary pressures since June last year. Even though the headline inflation has eased, core inflation remains stubbornly high. Johnson & Johnson has offered nearly $9 billion settlement to tens of thousands of people over claims that its talcum powder caused cancer. Now, if approved, the payout would be one of the largest product liability settlements ever in the United States and will put an end to a legal fight that has lasted for more than a decade. The settlement figure is about $7 billion higher than the company's previous attempts to resolve the situation. It would be paid out over 25 years through a subsidiary. Now, more than 60,000 registered claimants are reportedly supporting the proposal. Johnson & Johnson this year ended all international sales of its talc-based baby powder over cancer-causing claims. Now, that's nearly 3 years after its initial statement that it would stop such sales. Despite the settlement offer, it continues to deny any wrongdoing. More jobs data out from the U.S. pointing to a slower labor market. Private sector hiring rose far less than expected, hinting the aggressive monetary tightening may finally be cooling the market. Payroll processing firm ADP said that hiring in the private sector rose 145,000 in March. Now, that misses the estimate for 210,000 by a wide margin. It's also a big drop from February's 261,000. The biggest job losses came from the financial sector, followed by professional and business services. A Dutch court rejected a government plan to cap flights at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport. Now, this marks a victory for KLM and other airlines that had brought the case. The Dutch government announced the limit on flights in February as a temporary fix to cut noise pollution and to tackle other environmental issues. Now, the airlines took the government to court in March over the plans. They say that the cuts would hurt them, the Dutch economy, and travelers. They added that the 460,000 cap on flights from November 2023 to October 24 had not been properly vetted. Plus, they had already made investments on the basis of a 500,000 cap agreed back in 2015. And that's your business update for this hour. Back to you, Dawn.
Thank you, Roland. All right, now, finally, an emotional day in New Zealand's Parliament as former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern bid farewell in a tearful final address.
Lord Ada, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Ms Ardern shocked the nation in January when she announced her retirement from politics. The former leader had steered New Zealand through natural disasters, a pandemic, and the 2019 Christchurch mosque shooting. But she dedicated a significant chunk of her speech to climate change, urging the country's politicians to band together.
Climate change is a crisis. It is upon us. And so one of the very few things I will ask of this House on my departure is that you please take the politics out of climate change.
Ms Ardern will now become a trustee of Prince William's Earthshot Prize. Now, that hunts for solutions to the planet's most urgent environmental challenges. She has also vowed to devote herself to stamping out online extremism as part of the Christchurch Call Project. Now, that is a global initiative that she set up in the wake of the 2019 Christchurch mosque attacks, which killed more than 50 people.
Well, that's Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia.
Plus, we're also on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. Good night.
In our world, every day is a beautiful one. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.